Good boy, stay. Good boy, stay. Thank you. Good dog. Alright, so Benny, are you gonna have a nice bone? Yeah, stay. Alright. Just so you guys can see, this here is a beef neck bone that's been split in half, I think. And Benny off. Manners. It's, there's roughly 3 in a package, and they come frozen by Toddler Farms, Natural Pet Nutrition, apparently. They're pretty decent. They're much more durable than, say, a pork bone or a chicken bone, and they last a lot longer. You won't necessarily, unless you have a very powerful dog, like Benny, who's really big and experienced and very, very good at what he does. Unless you actually have a dog like that, then you're not going to have them go through the entire thing. So don't necessarily expect that they'll be able to consume this entire bone like they would poultry or pork bones, or other smaller animal bones. Even though it's not a weight-bearing bone, like, say, a leg, or hip or joint, it is still a pretty tough bone, so Benny can pretty much get through it if he gets enough time on it. But I don't expect that he is going to consume the whole thing. In fact, I will take it away long before he's consumed the whole thing. Mainly to, if it's been out too long and I think there's been enough bacteria growth that I don't want him eating it anymore. That's usually about the point that I take it away. So he'll actually get to hold on to this, whatever bone that is left, from this treat for a day or sometimes. Assuming that, sorry guys, I'm doing my best. Assuming that he has removed all of the soft tissues from the bone rapidly and that it was frozen the whole time. Assuming those factors, the bone itself is relatively safe. I mean, it's not infinitely safe, but a day or so is usually within the realm of possibilities. If you want to make it last longer, when they are initially done their first chew on it, take it away and put it back in the freezer, and take it out when you want to give it to them again. That'll make it last longer. Especially if you have a smaller dog who has no hope in actually consuming all of this. In which case, you should, time how long they get it for. So basically, give them the bone that you want to give them. And then when, like, say you want to give them a third of the bone per session or something, then you would, as soon as the dog has been able to chew through about a third, you would take it away, put it back in the freezer for a week or two. I would recommend having a few of these so that you can kind of cycle, if you're going to do that, so that they have a significant period in the freezer in between uses. You don't want to leave it just for a couple hours because it won't freeze fully and you won't get a lot of the benefits of disinfection and such. So the longer you can leave it in the freezer, the better. And the colder the temperature is in that freezer during that time, the better. But for smaller animals, it's definitely possible to do. You can either go based on, like, you don't want them to have it for more than a half hour, to when they've gone through 25 to 30% or something. Whatever amount is the amount that is appropriate for your dog and your situation. In Benny's case, I know he'll chew through this without too much difficulty. He'll definitely take the soft tissue off rapidly. and then he'll work on the bone bits as a bit of a. They're more of a toy for him, but you got to be really careful. They are definitely a choking hazard if the dog were to accidentally inhale them. So I certainly never allow the dog to have unsupervised access to those types of bones. I make sure that I'm directly supervising at all times when those types of toys or bones or treats are available. But depending on the risk factor, I'll just avoid them altogether. Like, for example, I love feeding different species and different animals, okay? I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I love variety. I know how important variety is, and I know the value and the significance if an animal is allowed to consume only one thing consistently, regardless of what that one thing is. They're going to develop deficiencies and deficits. So I like to feed a wide variety of different animal types. Yeah, the one of those kind of varying animals that I like to use is kangaroo. It's in theory, it sounds so attractive. It's a marsupial. It's very different. It's still a smaller animal. Like, in many ways, kangaroo is very idealized. However, every single time I try to use a kangaroo product, it's come back to bite me in the butt. Very painfully, and I have had to learn my lesson the hard way on those. I have an outright ban on all things kangaroo tendons, just in their very shape and nature. They are almost an automatic choking hazard. In fact, Benny's first time touching them, he basically nearly choked to death. If it wasn't for the fact that I was directly supervising, I was there at that split second. The first moment he was in distress, I immediately took action. I didn't let him flail around in distress and freak out, which meant that the object didn't go further down the throat. Like, it happened to have gone down the back. Obviously there's two ends. There's a flared end and a tiny end. If it had went down the tiny end first, there would be likely little I could have done, and he probably would have died. Alternatively, if because it went down the flared end first, I had access to that piece that I could grab to pull it out of his throat, which was one of the major reasons that he survived without too much issues. So kangaroo tendons really screwed me over there. And I learned my lesson, and I don't feed kangaroo tendon anymore. The other tendons, they don't have the same shape, at least as far as I've encountered so far, to be so perfectly designed as a plug, basically. There's something about that shape, and because it's a dried, smaller treat, most dogs aren't going to chew it enough. They're going to try to swallow it whole. And the easiest way to swallow whole is to, like, maybe chomp it a couple times, if that, and then swallow the small end first. So it was just that Benny was so excited by it that he swallowed these, or inhaled, I should say, the flared end first. That, he ended up lucking out, and me being there, able to perform the necessary medical treatment that he needed at that split second, combined with immediately getting him to the proper medical care, meant that he had relatively few issues from that. The next incident was I bought some kangaroo tail chunks. Basically, as I would later discover, I thought it would be like one hunk of a tail kind of thing, like a not pieces of a tail, but one tail. When I felt the bag, it felt like there was just one piece in the bag, so I assumed I was dealing with one intact tail that was dried. And I thought that's not too bad. Um, and, well, it's expensive. I mean, like I said, I love to get him the variety. Um, and I deliberately save as much as I can on his regular food so that I can afford to be able to get him something that's a bit different periodically so that he gets the variety. Um, so I bought it and came home, gave it to him, and definitely I paid that price. Um, Number one, every time he bit into it was like dust and it just crumbled. Um, and left these smaller bits that he easily swallowed quickly without having to chew anything. But then went through his digestive system, turning into basically blades that slashed up his stomach and bowels. He had blood in his stool for a few days after that, and it took him a while before he was totally back to normal. By the end of the week, he was back to his normal self, but still, for a few days, it was definitely a anxious time. If I had understood what exactly I was dealing with, instead of, as it would turn out, these cut up little pieces of the tail that were effectively stuck together by virtue of the fact that they were dehydrated and then got moist and then dried a little bit and became basically glued together. But as soon as the dog chomped on it, they broke down into their bits, and the individual bit that he had taken a bite out of basically crumbled into dust. And by the time I got everything away from him, and basically by the time I, one, understood the dangers that I was dealing with, and two, took the steps that I needed to remedy the situation, and three, by the time the situation was actually remedied, he had already swallowed a few chunks of it, and it was basically just shards of bone that had some dried meat around it, but that had no real consistency or material, so that the body would easily digest that little bit, scraps of meat that were kind of cushioning around the bone, what precious little there was, and then these sharp cut bits of bone that were pretty strong were just free to float around cutting. So he didn't get the rest of it. He ended up maybe consuming equivalency of probably about half of the first one, and the rest of the packaging and the material, the treats, I actually returned to the store. Having an understanding now of what actually the product was, I would never have bought that product. That is a recipe for disaster on a lot of levels. It's one thing to have like a dried bone where there's a huge bone and then a few pieces of meat around it. It's another thing to have like the skeletal structure intact with just like a hunk of that tissue kind of thing. And it's a whole other ballgame to have small broken bits like that. So I try to give intact whole like parts of the animal, as opposed to, like, say, taking a bunch of smaller bits and mushing them together to form a larger shape. Now, in fairness, well, ideal to do it the way the anatomy normally is and naturally is, and just let the dog chew through at its own relative pace. based on whatever it's facing. You know, that's one thing to do versus dealing with a dog that's like really getting out of hand. And tired, guys, sorry. My brain is a bit fried today. Yeah, you're a good boy. Settle. I'm doing the best I can here. Well, at the same time, I'm trying really to make sure that I don't do anything that causes any extra stress for my Bobo. Yeah, he's a very, very important piece of my life, and I can't imagine a world without him. I wouldn't want to live in that world. Yeah, so he's very important to me, and I work very hard to make sure that I'm never putting him in a dangerous or unsafe situation. So I do my best, and that's what I was trying to say. Now I remember. Yeah, so, well, ideal to do it that way. It's not the only way to do it, and many people I've known have taken whatever the cheapest meat they can get at the grocery store, which is usually chopped up chicken quarters, and taken a whole bunch of those and freeze them together into a whole hunk of meat and give it to their dog as one piece. And there's nothing really that bad with that. The main problem, theoretically, is when you're talking about like something as processed as what I'm talking about, where there's little bits of bone, there's not nearly enough meat to cushion the bone, but the animal's going to eat the entire thing. And these bones are now broken in little pieces, so instead of being just like normal bone, where if they're not going to be able to digest it, they can poop it out like all like intact. Not necessarily pleasant, but they can do it. Or at worst, if it's too big, they'll puke it back up. Like, their body knows how to process those things. But when we talk about things that have been broken in unnatural ways, it often results in sharp edges that aren't a very good thing. But it's, again, it really depends on a lot of factors. Like, it's one thing for when you have a young puppy to smash up a chicken quarter or something with a sledgehammer so that they can more easily eat the food and learn to eat a raw diet properly. And it's a whole other thing to have a bunch of little bones that have tons of sharp edges and are held in place by this like fragile web of dried meat that it wouldn't cushion even one of the pieces, much less all of them. So, there's a relative difference, and so as long as you kind of consider that there's enough meat around all of the bone and stuff, you're probably okay. But obviously situations where there's not a lot of meat, but potentially quite a few smallish bones that have lots of sharp edges, that is, so, It's a moot point. I'm just saying, basically, I stay away from kangaroo now. But in this case, because because Benny's chewing on it and working it through from basically one side over, as opposed to, like, say, swallowing it whole, I don't really have much to worry about with Benny in terms of risk of him swallowing this bone. But obviously, you know your dog best, so obviously take what you see and understand and learn in these videos and apply it as you best understand and know your situation and your dog. Obviously, if your dog's extremely food possessive and extremely anxious about humans approaching their food, you know, you shouldn't be, well, you definitely shouldn't be feeding them a favorite treat while you stick a camera on their face, that's for sure. If I was doing exactly the same thing I'm doing right here to a dog with those kind of issues, I would expect that, one, my camera is probably going to be destroyed before the end of this, and two, I should rightfully have my face chewed up by that dog for doing something as stupid as provoking the dog in such a fashion. But because I love Benny a lot, and I don't want to see anything bad happen to him, and I want to make sure that even if I'm filming or doing these things, that I'm not putting him under any unnecessary stress or causing him to have any gastric issues or to be concerned about the safety of his food or whatever. I would never put Benny in this position if I thought that he couldn't do this without issue. And obviously, at the very first sign of any suggestion that he was not comfortable and secure in this, I would cease immediately, and I would not continue, at least until the dog was fully secure again, and certain that would not be caused more issues by putting them back in that position. So, I mean, you understand that I do appreciate that innately what's going on has some serious potential for things to go badly, and people shouldn't assume that just because I am doing this with this dog that this is a good idea for anyone to do with any dog, or even their favorite best dog in the world that they think 100% shouldn't have an issue. You gotta, if you're wrong, you're gonna pay the price, and it's gonna be your face that's gonna be chomped on. So you might want to be 100% sure you know that the dog doesn't have any issues. To me, it's frankly, it's amazing just how beautiful and awe-inspiring these animals are. I mean, I don't think anybody can watch an animal work through even just eating their bone and come away from that saying, that's just a mindless drone, just operating on instinct, no mind, no brain, no emotions, whatever. Like, dogs are far more similar to people than most humans would have ever begun to guess, or ever will begin to guess. Dogs have been evolving to be dogs for as long as humans have been evolving to be humans, and both humans and dogs have been doing their evolving side by side for as long as there have been humans and dogs, basically. Like, it's hardly surprising that dogs would be as similar to people as they are. But ironically, some people have gotten fixated on the idea that humans are somehow such so different from animals, and that by virtue of humans having X abilities, animals must be below our abilities and must be less evolved or less effective or less fit or whatever as humans. Like, but it's not true. Like, when you consider, like, looking at it from the animal's perspective and understanding what's going on in that animal's world, you really begin to realize just how astonishing animals are, and you're never able to buy into that myth of, you know, that animals are just beasts with mindless beasts with, no emotions. And I mean, if there is anything in a human that could be called a soul, I am certain that dogs would be found to have just as much of a soul as people. I mean, the work that's been done and proven already in what canines can be taught to understand in language comprehension is just mind-blowing. Like, it appears that canine language is probably just about as complicated as verbal human languages. Obviously, the written stuff is a different ballgame, but the verbal communication is far more similar than I think anybody begins to realize. And their actual innate ability to understand language, well, it's by no means at the level of a human's. I mean, it still never ceases to amaze me, and frankly, I find it ironic that there are plenty of humans out there who are a lot less intelligent and have a lot less of language capacity as dogs do. So, I mean, I also find it really interesting that there's what any creature, human or dog or otherwise, can understand as their innate, like, natural, wild abilities. But it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a human or a duck or a cow or a dog. All of them have a amazing ability, especially when young, when just little babies, to be taught and to develop skills that they would not otherwise develop, but nonetheless to develop them and to have what appears to be a meaningful handle on them. I mean, when you see things like cats using the toilet to ducks opening a door and going in and sitting in their home kind of thing, to like these things that are complex behaviors that without a complicated mind that is very, very effective, they would just not be capable of doing these behaviors. If you really want a mind-blowing event, go and Google or check YouTube, whatever, I don't care. Crows and cats and fighting videos. Basically, these damn crows will pick their cat, like Gladiator, and then basically herd the cat that they pick to a designated spot with another crow that has picked their own contender cat that has harassed that said cat to the agreed upon area to meet up with, like I said, these crows that have brought their contenders and then harass the cats into fighting each other. And then the crows just kind of like stand around watching the fight. Like when the fights just start to like die down, or it looks like the cats aren't fighting enough, they'll egg them on. Like, it's crazy. Like, to see what these crows are doing is just, I don't have an explanation unless the crow's mind is far more able and adept than any human has given crows credit for, or at least any human I know of. Perhaps there's some human that has believed in crows to an excessive level that I am not aware of. But whatever. It's still crazy as it's just crazy. I cannot explain or justify why or how these crows have decided to start forming street fights based on slaves that they capture. But to each their own, and apparently that's what the crow's choice is.